Jeff, how are you, sir?
Doing all right. How are you?
I'm doing swimmingly, man.
Awesome.
We got coffee. It's hot. A lot of stuff is happening in ed tech. Okay.
Yeah.
And there's a lot going on around technology integration in schools. There's a lot going on with executive orders that came out yesterday. I actually talked to Brian Jagger, who's the founder of the Guardrails AI system that's integrated in College of Western Idaho and at several other universities, and then some 9 to 12 high schools. And again, it's an AI system. I talked to him yesterday, having a big conversation about tech in schools. It is becoming more involved as we have data breaches, right? Because we're aggregating information for people. It's becoming more integrated as people are now, that we have essentially a self-perpetuating technology kind of argument, which is like, well, we've always had tech. It's like, yeah, for the last 4 years, we've always had tech. Yeah. But like before, what did we do in 2019? They're like, oh, I don't know. That was like the before time. Talk to me about the current state of ed tech.
Yeah, I do think that AI is kind of the next, we used to not have laptops or Chromebooks or whatever. And so we've kind of gotten through that hoop. Although I think people who bought stuff 5 years ago, those devices don't last too long and there's not a whole lot of money to go buy the next round. So we'll see if we have one-to-one systems in the future. But AI is
if I may, like that was a big one-time thing.
Yeah.
Where, like a lot of people got one-time monies.
That's right.
And they utilized it for long-term or repetitive expenses, which is like, okay, let's buy all these Chromebooks with this $5 million we have right now.
That's right.
But then we're going to have another $5 million line. I'm like the book refresh issue.
Because Google doesn't update Chromebooks after 4 years, right? So you can't even get the new patches. This stuff stops working. Right. And there was also at the time an incentive for all the companies that make Chromebooks to make a ton because people were buying them like crazy because they were either stuck in their house or schools were buying them or whatever. Sure. So even the idea that schools are going to be able to buy those devices at the same cost is also crazy because there's not as much of an incentive as there was during the pandemic. So I think that's one thing is that we're likely to see a slide back from one-to-one for better, for worse, but I don't think it's as guaranteed as schools have kind of seen right now. The other thing is that when you talk about AI, we were just at a conference last week and people were talking about how people jumped on the idea of a prompt engineer and like, oh, this is going to be the job that we can train people for. And
everybody talks about prompt engineers.
Right. They've already got models. Prompt engineering is actually one of the easiest things to outsource to a large language model because it's like, how they're saying that paralegals are all like that work is all going to be done. It's like they've figured out based on the question that you ask, name your LLM, they choose the model that they're responding to. And if it's a super sophisticated question, they decide to burn the energy to take you up to the latest model and answer that way. But if you're just asking like a fairly generic question, they go down to a certain level and less electricity, less cost for them. So like the idea that everybody's going to go be a prompt engineer has already been like thrown out the window. So I think schools can't keep up right now with what they're supposed to be teaching when it comes to AI. The executive order yesterday takes a couple steps in saying what was interesting about it was like it wasn't just focused on K-12 schools, right? It's like we need an AI workforce redesign too, because no matter what the job that you're doing, figure out what parts are likely to go over to AI, what parts you need to get stronger in because they're not going to move that way. And that's happening in schools, and schools probably by design move slower than a lot of other institutions. But employee training is like pretty much been the same for decades too. And so there's a whole idea that we're going to have to figure out how to train people on what they focus on less, what they don't need to focus on, what's going to kind of be done for them. I think schools are still at the point where there's still a bunch of them that are saying we're going to teach the 5-paragraph essay and you don't get to use a large language model. And I'm not sure that that's preparing any kid for the world that they're going to be in when they graduate from high school, hopefully, is somebody's going to be able to do that for them. They need to maybe interact with a model to figure out how to make a better 5-paragraph essay than they would have been able to do on their own. And at best, maybe it's like instead of having to do that for 5 years in elementary school like I did, and each year you got a little bit more sophisticated, maybe you only have to learn how to do that for like 6 months and then you can move on to something else. Okay. But the curriculum's still stuck, I think, a lot of times in what we did before we had AI, before we had technology, even if there is a one-to-one device, and even if we've got, Gemini moving AI into schools that are using Google right now.
Okay, here's a question for you. Is there a conversation around tangential benefits to tasks? For instance, you got to write the 5-paragraph essay. Okay. Now, there are a lot of things that are going on there. You have to structure an argument. You actually have to understand the content in order to fill in the structure. You got to do all these different things. You got to have spelling. You got to have grammar.
Yep.
But you also have to develop a cognitive capacity to tie all of these things together. Like I've been a chatty guy most of my life, right? Not a surprise there. But I I really didn't understand how to write until I was a sophomore. And then I started sophomore in college and I started learning how to write. And then through my junior and senior year studying rhetoric, it wasn't just writing, but it was this really in-depth thought process where I could essentially visualize different arguments like a chess game, like people backing into corners or like hooks or traps or things of that nature. But that was assisted by my requirement to write in college, because they're like, listen, you're going to have to write these papers, and I'd have to think through all of these different things. And the writing slowed down my thought process, because you can imagine it's a train wreck in my head. It's like 1,000 miles an hour, and having it down on paper. Like when I argue with people very frequently, I had this argument, an argument last week with somebody where I frequently wonder, if I just go to the whiteboard and I start writing down what their positions are, and then I draw out, different discussions with it, you could see where the non sequiturs jump in. You could see where they're shifting the topic. You could see it's like, no, come back to this line. You have to address this line. Physically seeing that in the world prevents a lot of Mickey Mousing and looking passing. So is there a conversation around like, okay, this task 1, 2, and 3 we could do on AI, but in pursuit of developing those skills, we get skills like 5, 6, and 7 that we won't be able to get otherwise?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think when you go back to the idea of a 5-paragraph essay, what you do before you write the whole essay that you learn, because if somebody just says write a 5-paragraph essay, you start and you write the first sentence, and then by the last sentence, none of it makes sense in between, right? So you learn to go make the outline. Right. Like, what's the argument you're trying to make? Right. And before you even think about the middle 3 paragraphs, you need to make sure that you're reinstating that argument and why the paragraphs before that. So you do the first thing, then you do the last paragraph when you actually learn how to do this, and then you go back and you need 3 different examples to get those things. That can still be done on paper. It could be done on a computer. It doesn't need an AI team to do that. And when you think about it, if you took a 8-year-old and you asked them what argument they wanted to make, they can do all that without ever touching the tech at all, right? So what do you want? Like, what's the argument you're trying to make? Let's write that down. Let's type it up, whatever it's going to be. What you could do is then you get a little bit of an outline, and instead of that kid having to take the next 2 weeks to write that out, particularly if you're a kid who maybe you got a physical disability, like I taught special ed, and so you could use still to get the outline. And then instead of 2 weeks later, they've got that first draft of a 5-paragraph essay. Tomorrow, they might have a first draft of a 5-paragraph essay. So I think we have to think about, to your point, what are the skills we want somebody to learn? The point of a 5-paragraph essay is to learn how to make an argument and stick to it, to learn that you need valid additional examples to back up your argument and not just say something and make people believe it. But that there's a form and function. It doesn't necessarily need to look like a 5-paragraph essay. But I think the exciting thing for me is, how do we figure out the things that we still need to teach? And how can AI supplement that? And then we should change some of the things we're doing to let kids be able to get faster at that, and then be able to do more of that. And instead of having the old standard be, you've got to be able to do this in the course of a month, the whole idea of AI is a lot of things are going to speed up. We shouldn't be surprised that some of the things we should teach, we should have an expectation that both educators and kids can do some things more rapidly. It doesn't necessarily change the point of why you're learning how to do that, which is actually to be able to hold a valid argument, to be able to find examples. Sure. But it's the process to get there doesn't need to look the same that it always did.
Yeah. And, to this point, I remember when I was allowed to use a calculator in math, and it blew my mind. I was like, I can use a calculator. And it was like 7th or 8th grade. Yep. And, the whole point of math through your early years is like, no. You got to do the operation. You got to do you learn your times tables, you learn your additions, you learn all these skill sets. And then once you get to a point, they're like, all right, the point of this test is not to see if you can do 7 times 8. The point of this test is like all this other stuff. So we're going to let you use this calculator. Now, am I worse at multiplication now than, before? Like, okay, look, I don't think so. But the idea is at some point you're like, oh, we don't really care if, that's not the point of this. The point of this is doing this advanced stuff. Yeah. So we allow like the TI-84, right? Yeah. TI-85, different large calculators or competent calculators can do really advanced stuff. And we let the rudimentary things go away. Do you think that there's a world where it's like, okay, we're going to use AI integration, because at the end of the day, when somebody graduates, we want them to be able to produce high quality, let's say, let's use a 5-paragraph. We want them to be able to produce a 5-paragraph essay really, really high quality quickly. Yeah. Okay. And part of that will likely include AI at some point. Okay. But that doesn't mean we're not going to go through like your times tables. Like you're still going to be learning all of these things along the way. And then maybe in the last year or two, it's like, okay, now that you know how to do all these things, the point is not whether or not you can do the 5-paragraph essay by hand with like good writing. Because by the way, my penmanship is terrible.
Right. You can write it, but nobody else can see it.
Right.
Yeah.
But like, I want my kids to learn good penmanship. Like I don't want my second grader to have sloppy penmanship. But at some point, you're going to get sloppy penmanship because I'm not writing stuff by hand anymore. Like I'm typing it, right? We let go of those skill sets. So do you think the integration might look in the future where it's like, no, we still do the writing we still do the penmanship. We still do the addition and multiplication tables. And then at some point, we untether that from the product and say, okay, we're going to this next layer where we don't care about those things. We believe you have a sufficient level of capacity. Now we actually want to increase your output. Yeah. And we're going to integrate these tools with you.
Yeah. It's a version to me of, so when I was a teacher, I taught 4th and 5th grade special education. And the goal was, right, you got a kid, hopefully around 3rd grade, which is why a lot of states have 3rd grade literacy as like their benchmark for what they're looking for. That's when you move from learning to read to reading to learn. And the goal is that you've got enough literacy that you can actually read something like a textbook back when I was in school, right? That you can change the lesson. Then the lesson is not just you're not doing, well, I had to teach balanced literacy, which we've like learned like nobody should have been doing at all. Like, and now people are back on phonics, which I think is great. But you've got the goal to like, how quick can you get a kid to move from learning to read to reading to learn? And a version of that can happen when it comes to AI, a version can happen when that comes to tech, is that I think we hopefully will be able to differentiate more. It used to be that you waited till every single kid in your class got from reading, everybody had to be able to read to learn before you could move over to that side. And we can do a little bit more kid by kid by saying, okay, they've figured out the 5-paragraph essay. The handwriting is good enough. It doesn't necessarily need to be perfect, but we got to that. So let's not do that anymore. Let's move them on to the next thing. And the goal, I think, for folks who are in ed tech like me is that we should be able to build stuff that helps educators move a kid to the next thing. When do they get to that point? And when I was a college board, you're talking about the calculator. Like they used to, you have the math part of the SAT. And for a long time, you couldn't use a calculator when you went in and took the test. And then they figured out how to do that and how to not cheat and not have people downloading programs into the calculator to do more. They had to change the test. They had to change the test. So the psychometricians that work at the College Board had to ask different questions than they did before they allowed the use of calculators. And so I think we have to think about, how do we change the test? When does it change? To your question, like, is it at 3rd grade? Is it at 10th grade? We're going to know a lot more about this technology by the time kids get there anyway.
What about the free response section of the math? That made people's heads explode.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, no, you have to generate the answer. It's not multiple choice. Like you got to bubble in stuff. Right.
And that's like, you see that
you don't even know what the answer could be.
Right. Folks who are thinking about this in schools right now, I met a guy who's going around teaching folks how to think about being a teacher with AI. It's like, you don't outlaw it. You say, show me everything you did with that language model from the beginning, right? Like, when did you correct it? When did it correct you? Like, what did you learn from the fact that it gave you 3 different examples? You had to choose one of those 3 examples. Right. Why did you choose that? Right. So the assessment is, it may look more like, let's have a conversation about what you did over the last week to get this version of the 5-paragraph essay that is not just, I sat here and wrote and I hate my letter K, so I erased it 17 times. So there's a hole in my paper where I'm supposed to write the letter K. Instead, you've just got this long printout of your conversation with that tool to get to a different version of it. His thing that I hadn't thought about it this way. It's like, part of what you do when you learn how to write is everybody tells their own story, right? Like, tell me about your family or tell me about your summer vacation. And he's like, every single kid theoretically should be able to write a New York Times best-selling novel version of their own life by the time they get to 3rd grade. Because they can tell their story, they can have the tools that help them go from what I was able to write when I was in 3rd grade to what hopefully technology can enable them to do. But they still have to figure out, like, why would you tell your story? What are the types of arguments you make when you're trying to get people to believe you? Like, some of those core skills are still built into how you get there. The goal, if we do this right, is that 1, it can be faster, and 2, you don't have to wait for every single kid in the class to get to the same level before we can move them on to the next thing.
And I think the enormity of integration, the enormity of the task of integration is so great that it's kind of like, it's hard to get people, and I've struggled with this too. It's like, okay, where are we even trying to get? Because I think if you look at the end result, it's like, okay, kids born today, can we all agree that in 22 years or 18 years, whenever he enters the workforce, this person will be expected to have an efficiency level of work that is likely inconceivable right now.
Yep.
If they're doing things that utilize, reading, writing, things of that nature. Like if you're doing pipe welding or something, and no shade on that at all. If you're a lineman, no shade on that at all. You're likely, like, you're not going to be able to speed that up. Maybe we'll have robots and stuff and things go faster, right? But if you're doing something like a paralegal, or if you're a grant writer, or if you're if you're a grant writer and you can write 10 grant proposals a day, you're going to be required to do 100.
Yeah,
like it's it's literally going to be like 10x, because I can blow through a grant proposal. I've never written one. Okay, I literally didn't even try to generate one until like a week or two ago, and then it spat it out. I was like, oh, that looks great.
Yep.
Like,
good to go. Yeah,
I'm like, copy over there, right? Erase the budget. But the point is, like,
make sure you delete the prompt.
Yeah.
People always, you see people doing this all the time. They'll copy paste something, but they leave the prompt that it's in there, or
stop
it's like at the top.
You got to tighten it up.
Yep.
You got to tighten. Don't
Yep.
be so sloppy.
It
Like, just
takes
give it a
3
once
seconds.
over. Give it a one, and like when it asks at the end, do you want anything else? Erase
That's right.
that
Erase
too.
that part too. Yeah.
Top and bottom, you got to get rid of the stuff and make sure the font matches. But like you have all of these things where it's like, okay, we're going to upregulate what people are expecting. There was a big discussion about government employees. Obviously when President Trump took office, and he was like, we have too many employees. And somebody brought up, I read this article that somebody had posted. They're like, we have, and I don't know if this is true. They're like, we actually have fewer employees now, or like almost the exact same number of employees as the 1970s. It's like 2 million federal, whatever. And I never say anything on Facebook, but I look at this as like, if I ever did write something, I would probably write like,
it's better that you don't. Probably.
Yeah. Oh, it's 1,000 times better that I don't. But like, think about the worker in 1970. They didn't have email. They didn't have text messages. Like, think of how fast we're moving now. All of these things we're capable of. It's probably like 20x easy what somebody could do in 1970. So in reality, we should have divided the federal workforce by 20 to represent the workforce required to do that work today. Right? Like, all of these things.
Then the other idea though too is that there's different work we should be able to do. So there are some things that the federal government does right now, 50 years later, that they weren't doing. Now, people can argue about whether they should or shouldn't, but the type of work that the federal government is doing now is different. Like DOJ came out of an office that was started a few years ago that was designed to do government efficiency projects. Right. And it's been changed during this administration, but like there was no such thing as those types of folks going in to do data analytics to figure out what they could cut out and not have to do as much.
Right.
So, I think part of what I'm worried about when we're thinking about how we are dissecting public education into certain things, like absolutely parents should be able to choose the best outcomes for their kid. And if something's not working in a system, it is awesome for them to have different alternatives. Sure. But the reason why states on average spend 50% of their tax dollars on public education is not just so that there's a specific skill set that kid has when they leave at 18. We don't even do as good a job as we should be able to do for every kid when we get there right now. But we do it because, one, hopefully we've learned that they're maybe going to have to change that skill set a couple times, like they didn't have to when we were pumping out kids in 1910 who kind of went and did the whole thing for the rest of their career. But there haven't been that many generations of people who walked into office buildings every day. That's a relatively new American phenomenon. I work from home. That's not happening for me anymore. And it's harder to interact with people when you're stuck at home all day. So part of the reason that we choose to have public schools is so that like I can learn how to go have an awkward conversation with somebody that I've never met before.
Dude, it's so awkward.
Right.
I remember the first time I asked a girl for her number. I was in like 7th grade. I botched it. It was terrible. I was like, hey, I need your number. She's like, ew, no, you don't. I'm like, oh, you're right. Okay. And you have that awkward interaction.
You learn that, and it's much better that happens to you when you're in 7th grade than if you're like 45 struggling to ask somebody out for the first time, right? And so part of, yes, we want a skill set. And back to what we were talking about with like what needs to stay in the curriculum and what doesn't. Like the key pieces of why we bring people together and put them in rooms for hours a day. One, we need babysitting so that we can all go do our jobs. Like people forget that like
let's not be like this is absolutely a thing. Right. Like when everybody got locked home, like the number one, like I did not hear as many people saying, I'm worried about my kid's like writing ability as much as like my kid needs to get the hell out of this house.
That's
like
right.
I got work to get done. I got to go do things. Like I'm trying to run a family. Like, you have 2 working parents and they weren't like, is he getting challenged in math? They're like, get the hell out of the house. Like open the schools back up.
And it's almost like, it sounds like I'm making a joke that that's the number one reason why we have public education. But like, especially now that most folks have both people, if they're in a 2-parent household, like both parents are working in a different way than they were a generation or two ago. Like we need somewhere safe for a kid to be at. And hopefully, and there are mistakes made, but hopefully from like 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. if your kid's in elementary school, like you feel decent about where your kid is and you don't have to worry about that. Before your kid gets into school, you're paying childcare, and everybody knows how that expensive that is. So there are public goods beyond just that skill set. Does the skill set need to change? Absolutely. But there's also a ton of other things we're expecting that school system to do that we don't think about until we like have this whole disparate setup of where we have tons of kids that we can't figure out how to feed. And the more of those kids that go into all these different types of schools, there's actually some like cost benefit analysis to having a few hundred kids all in the same place. It's way easier and way cheaper to feed everybody in a schedule. You've got my school, 5 lunch ladies. We knew who they were. They knew how to make everything. They made them in huge batches, right? When you split people up, it's a lot more expensive to feed people that way. So there's a ton of things that we said, we need this system because we've got to not only prepare kids for where we want them to go, but as a society, it's hopefully the cheapest and most effective way. Is it the best? Not always. Should we get better at it? Absolutely. But the idea that we're going to be able to figure it out case by case, completely independently, and we're not going to have a bunch of people who don't know how to ask somebody out when they leave, when they leave their parents' house, which is later and later that people are leaving their parents' house anyway. I am worried about that as much as I am the fact that we need to prepare kids for jobs that don't exist yet, and that what their day-to-day life and work is going to look like. I mean, you talk to people like Elon Musk, and when he was high on OpenAI at the beginning, when he was one of the founders there, his whole thing was that like people would be able to not have to work so hard. Like you actually would be able to spread the wealth and like make the same amount of money and not have to do back bending labor, right? Hopefully we'll have some technology that keeps those linemen safer while they do it. You'll probably still have to have somebody up there doing it, but hopefully it can be faster, and maybe we figured out some ways to make it less dangerous. And so it's not just that we're going to have to change all the work. It's like, we're not going to have the same type of lives, and like lives today don't look like they did in 1950.
Right.
And we can't necessarily prepare for that. But the things we can do are figure out how to efficiently try to do the best for the most kids for the least amount of money. Because like as a taxpayer, it's like way more expensive to put people into like 30 different kinds of education instead of having them in one classroom.
Right. And if you want relevance, right, if that's at the core of what public education should be. We want a relevant, effective education that prepares somebody for the outside world. Like, I don't think there's anybody, okay, until I started messing around with AI and like ChatGPT, for instance.
Yeah.
Until I started messing around, I'm like, now I'm like, you're not going to beat this one, man. Like unless you can get a task done in 30 seconds, if it's like a 5-minute task, there's no reason for you. And if you're like typing something, there's no reason. I tried to do it for episode descriptions, but then I realized the prompt engineering took as long as like, it was like, okay, well, if I'm just telling the AI what the episode was about, then I don't
That's
need
right.
to
You're
do
spending
that.
half an hour trying to ask the right question. You might as well just answer it.
Right. Now, if I want to take a description and run it through AI and say, use this description, but make it like SEO friendly, that's a different thing. I don't do that because I'm like, like if people don't like it, I don't want to
find it one way or the other.
Like I don't want, it just throws in like all these ridiculous, word choices and like repeats people's names and stuff. So it pings up. It's like, I don't really care that much.
That is one thing that I'm worried about is I do think that the more we kind of fall into the trap of letting, Gemini or Claude or whoever you're using answer everything for you, it gets like there is far less creativity and there's far less differentiation. So like back to it's like, how do we help kids know who they are so that they can recognize that when the AI spits something out, they're like, no, that's not me. And instead of just accepting it so they can turn in the thing. And that's why the assessment has to change. Because if the point is to write a story about your summer vacation, and like, right. And so is the assessment then like, you have to write this story and you have to have your classroom then ask you 4 questions about your summer vacation that only you're going to know. Because so like you don't have a kid just opting into having that whole thing written for them. They're not even checking it. They've got the prompt and the thing at the end still on when they turn it on. If they know that a follow-up is going to be, your peers are going to ask you about that. Like, why did you choose to tell me that part of the story and not this one?
Why'd you select the strawberry ice cream?
That's right. So we have to figure out what we're going to do to help kids not just fall into the trap of like everything being the same. Because if you put in, a grant proposal over time, it's going to look very, very different if you've got 20 different nonprofit leaders putting in their responses to a grant proposal. If all 20 of those folks are going over to the same large language model and asking them to spit out the same response to the same questions, it's going to look very, very similar. And the person who's trying to decide what that grant like who's going to get the grant, they're going to have to change the grant application to actually get the information that they want. And the same thing's going to have to happen in schools.
You're going to have to bring some kind of creative ingenuity and human. And that's what I keep coming back to too, which is like, we are going to upregulate the importance of creativity and like that human experience. I was talking to Brian Jagger a couple weeks ago in our original conversation. I was like, listen, I'm not that worried about this for a number of reasons, because you don't see a giant influx of comedians like taking the stage. Now, mind you, you and I could get half-hour bits, 5-minute bits. We could get funny stuff. We could get dirty stuff. We could get knock-knock jokes.
Yep.
And they would be world-class. We could have them written like Dave Chappelle, you know, whoever you like, right? Louis C.K. Give me Louis C.K. married to Seinfeld. Like, and
right. And
like,
there it is.
And there it is, right? Because even though we could do that, I'm not going to an open mic, because you have this human performative element where even if you have the answer, right, you still have to like deeply know it. You have to deeply understand it. You have to understand what the funny thing or creative thing is. It's not the joke itself. It's the delivery of the joke. Anybody could read the joke. That doesn't mean you're a comedian, right? And there's that whole nature. I mean, even within education, people always conflate like, hey, I have the teacher's manual. Oh my God, this one lady, this was hilarious. Her son comes here, comes to class, and he pops in like the second class. So there's already kind of like a good dynamic going on.
Yep.
First class, everybody's like a little awkward.
Yeah.
I don't know what's going on.
First class, you're just trying to get everybody set
and
up.
like they come in and I swear immediately, I'm like, how the fuck are you guys doing? They're like, whoa, right? So like, get them off bounce real fast. Cause they come in, they're like, I'm not going to like this SAT class. I'm like, you're going to like the class.
They're forced to go.
Yeah, right. And whenever people come in, in my classroom, I had all this gear lining the walls, right? And they come in, I'm like, by the way, like you guys can have whatever you want here. Like it's all just for my students. And they had all seen it at the different classes. It all said, it was all Matt Todd University stuff, right? And so the first class they come in, they're like, I'm not going to take it. They're like, all right, that's fine. Second class they come in, they go straight to the wall. They're like, hey, can I take anything? I'm like, yes, you can. Here we go, right?
Yeah.
So the kid comes in the second class. I'm like, hey, listen, this is what we went over last week. We're going to get you up to speed. Like, give me 20, everybody, like, let's start correcting. Get him up to speed, has a great class, takes home a hoodie, really excited about it. And the mom the next day calls and she's like, you know, I think we're going to go with like a different program. That never happened. And I was like, this kid was on it. Like he loved it. So I was like, oh no. And I'm like, hey, what? Yeah. Like totally fine. But like, what can I ask what?
Right.
And she's like, well, and she wouldn't give me an answer. She's like, well, what do you think the key points of preparing are? Like, what is it? I'm like, well, look, like you got to figure out why people make mistakes, right? Because kids make mistakes and like, let's take math. You make mistakes for like 10 different reasons. Now, if you just take a mistake as this kid doesn't know the material, that's inappropriate. It could have been an execution mistake. It could have been a reading mistake. It could have been all kinds of, you got to flush out what they know, what they don't know, why they're making mistakes. Sometimes you can jack up the score without teaching them anything new, just by refining and improving their execution. Like all these, having this big conversation with her. And she comes, she's like, I'll bring your book back. I'm like, oh, well, okay, thanks. Whatever. She brings the book back, binder, and I take it home. And it's one of those comb binders.
Oh,
right?
Yep.
And I made them all myself, been making them for years. And I'm looking at them, I was like, the hell's wrong with this thing? Like, I was like, what? And I couldn't figure it out. And what I realized is the comb was on in reverse, right? So instead of the teeth going down through the cover, the teeth were coming up, back. And I noticed it because there was this flap where the teeth, go into the groove. I'm like, what the hell? So I get my mom like, hey, did you make the binders? Because she was like, no, I never did. I'm like, are you sure you don't do it? She's like, no, I haven't done it that way for years. Of course, we never make them that way. And so I get a hold of mom. I was like, did you take this binder apart? And it turns out she had taken it apart. She's like, well, I didn't want to return a binder where like a couple pages were. And I was like, did you copy this? I was like,
yep.
I was dying. I was like, it's not going to help.
Yep.
First off, there aren't even answers in this.
Yeah.
Second, just having the problem is irrelevant. You can go buy at Barnes & Noble or wherever the hell we were buying books back then.
Yep.
You could get any of these books off Amazon. That's not going to help prepare your son. That's not the education, right? Just like the jokes aren't the comedian. Like, there's more to it than this. Man, that lady, I think her last name was like Schultz or something.
Did she start selling your t-shirts too? I mean, like, it's like,
God, there was a black market for my hoodies. There was. People would come and try to get them to like sell them to their friends.
Because like everybody wanted to be where you were.
And they would, if you were my student, you got anything you wanted for free. If you weren't my student, you couldn't get anything. And people like lost their minds. I had brand reps at the campuses. So they had trunks full of the gear for the students that had been in my class, but weren't coming back to class anymore. So it's like, oh, a new hoodie came out. So I'd give the new hoodies to the kids. And so it's like, you got to come to my car. They pop the trunk and it's all the merch. They're like, what's that? Medium? Oh, here you go. Have a good day.
You got to change up the design every once in a while so you can actually be relevant.
Every 3 weeks, I do 100 hoodies every 3 weeks. 100, they were gone. Yeah. Like it was the best time. I love teaching.
Well, I mean, like to the point that like, so you figured out that hoodies would work for you. You also, it sounds like it was probably pretty hard for that mom to pull all those, like just even the type of the spine of the book, right? Like I think when I was teaching, I think about like what I would do differently if I like all the stuff that is in classrooms now wasn't there when I was there. My co-teacher, like we had a smart board, right? So it's like the whiteboard, but it's actually electronic. I got pulled out to go learn how to use it with the first day it came into class. My co-teacher stayed in with all 30 of our kids. She thought it was just a whiteboard because nobody told her any different. So the kids wrote an expo marker all over this like probably couple $1,000 board that sat in the corner of our room for the entire rest of the year because you couldn't get it off. And we never got to use that smart board. So
those are like $5,000.
Yeah.
Or they were, at least at the start.
The first version, version 1.0. So I think about like, what are the things I wish could be different from my teaching experience that would help me do the uniqueness things, right? So like, I do think that like when we think about AI, yes, there is the curriculum changes that'll happen, the assessment changes that will need to happen. Kids will hopefully be able to learn differently. Sure. But there's also a ton of stuff that teachers have to do, that schools have to do, that actually could be made more efficient. Like you can think about even just like attendance or just like stuff like that like I literally was writing in a book every single day when kids would walk in the door, and you add that stuff over time and it gets you to the uniqueness part. So I taught kids with special needs so they'd have a diagnosed IEP, right? I got to move up with my kids from 4th grade to 5th grade. And in the middle of 5th grade, there was a kid who had an oppositional defiance disorder, ODD diagnosis. Sure. And he was brilliant. He could read like crazy. He was the top kid in like reading levels, but math, he would just like not do it. It was not working. And we switched over for whatever reason. I had like bought all these, like I went to Staples as a teacher, you got Staples discount. And I got all these like whiteboards and I got blue markers that time. He went from not engaging in math at all to sitting right next to me with a whiteboard and a blue marker, and he could do all of it. And I tried. I literally gave him a piece of paper and pencil like one day, and he just like stopped doing it for whatever reason. The feel of the whiteboard, the blue marker, like right. And then none of the other kids actually liked that better. They all went back to paper and pencil. I thought I was like, okay, I should have bought one instead of 10 and would have had more money. But for Sean, having that whiteboard changed his ability to do math. It wasn't like I didn't do anything like I wasn't smarter. I didn't do a different technique of like, hey, let's do your times tables this way. He just needed somebody who had paid attention enough and tried enough things with him to find the thing that works and then be consistent with it, right? And there were other kids who 4 of them just needed reading glasses. They had been given an IEP, which means you can't graduate from New York City public schools with the same type of diploma that somebody else, and they just needed to have their eyes tested. We got him glasses through like a program that the school had and everything. And it still took them a while, but they went from like being way behind in their reading level to be almost a grade level by the end of the second year I was with them. Not because I was a genius, because they didn't ever get tested for eyesight until I had them for that period of time. So like, I think there are some things we can do to help teachers not be the most amazing curriculum person, not know every single thing in the entire world. Because like you said, even if we had a teacher right now who knows every single thing that a kid needs to know to be successful today, tomorrow it changes. Right. So we can't expect teachers to be able to do that. But the thing that I remember about my favorite teachers were the people who knew me for me and like did something in the classroom that made me know that she or he knew that I was there, I was seen, somebody had paid attention to me, and like my life was a little bit better because of something that they had done for me. Man, that's such a great representation of the differentiation and upregulation of humanity and creativity within a classroom that will set people apart. There was this, again, my entire career was tutoring, right? And I had this one student whose parents really engaged in like a shotgun effect with tutors. So she had like 3 or 4 different tutors, which is fine, whatever, like free to do that. And one of them, which I always thought was hilarious, is people couldn't distinguish between somebody who knew material really, really well and somebody who was a good teacher. Like they just always assumed like, oh, this person. So she had this one tutor who would come and sit there and he'd just like stare at her work. He wouldn't say anything. He wouldn't do anything. She was like, Jesus Christ. And it was like, he only lasted like 2 sessions because even though like that guy, let's say that guy was like 10 times smarter than me, which is not
probably hard to do, but like Sparky was really smart and like he was sitting there waiting for it. But it's like, that's not going to encourage her to go forward. When he does try to encourage her, she hasn't started a relationship. Like this one, I remember this one dad kind of made this like sideways comment about how much I talk to the kids. And it's like, listen, we have to meet for 2 hours to go over SAT stuff, or like 90 minutes. Do you think if I just sit there quietly, this is going to go well? Like the kid's not going to. So it's like, yeah, every 10 minutes I have like some ridiculous anecdote. And like, we got to do that.
You gotta
like,
pull 'em back in.
Like we got to bring, got to change. Like, in the middle of processing, you change the topic, you challenge them, you change their perspective, and then you force them back in, and they keep readjusting to the task. And it's like, you'll get through it, but they're going to be far more engaged after 50 problems than if you just said go 1 to 50 and not done anything. Right. Like you got to reel them away. Anyway. I'm sure you get it. But
well, and that's like, I think one cool thing that can happen, it's like super idealistic, but like, so my mom retired last year. Her entire career was as music teachers, mostly here in Idaho, bunch of different districts. And so every time she would move from one school district to another, you're kind of starting all over again.
Right.
And some place, everywhere either had a music program, but maybe it wasn't that great. Maybe it was tiny. Maybe they were restarting it, and that's why they were hiring a music teacher. And most of the places, she was the entire music teacher for the entire school district, right? So she's teaching everything from kindergartners to the band in middle school that only plays like 3 songs every single year to like high school choir and all those different things. So she's doing it all. And when I think about like what we hopefully can do in education by hopefully accelerating things, whether it's AI or tech or different things, and helping kids get where they need to be, is that the thing that people remember about school is not when they got like 20 out of 20 on a problem set. It was how they were celebrated, or when that allowed them to do something else, or the sports they were able to play, the like awkward first circumstance where they tried to ask somebody out. It's the human interaction stuff. And the reason why I think about my mom when I think about this is like, no school needs to have a music program. It's not a requirement. You don't have a standardized test that kids have to pass in order to be able to do that. But I grew up in council, and so that's where most of my mom's teaching was, at least that I remember. And then she went on to a couple other places. We went to Disneyland as like a band every other year
too. I remember.
And so we did that, whatever it was, 13-hour drive. We'd stop at some like town in Nevada that my parents used to live in, where they knew people, so we could sleep on the gym, right? So we'd go to the middle of nowhere, get to Nevada, then cross over to get to Disneyland. And I got to know those kids that were in my grade because of that drive that we took and the time that we were there. Sometimes we sounded great. Sometimes we sounded awful. Sometimes there was one kid that made us all sound awful. Right.
Brian.
But that's
Brian.
Right. Exactly. And that stuff. And over time, my mom's music program would go from like 10 kids the first year to 15 the second. And then every time, no matter what, she would leave with this amazing band program, because she was the type of teacher that it wasn't required. You didn't have to take her class, but she made people feel like they wanted to be there. And then you got to know everybody else in that class because of the stuff that you got to do when you participated in things like sports or like music or that kind of stuff. And there is a movement, and I get why, to go back to basics. Like, why are my tax dollars going to all this stuff? And some of it is like peripheral stuff that most people can agree shouldn't be in a classroom, right? And there's a lot of politics that are talked about when it comes to education. But the stuff that I hope we can have more of in schools is stuff that helps kids see that like their community cared about them enough that they created this place. They paid for this place, whether they had kids who got to experience it or not. It was important enough for them to say, you are part of our community. You're growing up here. We want you to have the best of everything. And does that mean that we need Chromebooks for every single kid? I'm not sure. Does it mean that we need different kind of AI tutoring? Probably. I don't know what that is. But if we can get some of that stuff right so that kids can experience more of what it's like to be part of a team, to be like to learn something and have somebody next to you be better than you at it and want to go be better because that kid showed you that was possible. To pick up a kid who had a bad day and learn how to help them out too, so that you're not just thinking about yourself. That to me is hopefully what we can have more in schools if we can get some of this stuff right. I don't think we're doing it right yet. I'm not sure that we'll get there, but I worry that by trying to pull it apart and saying we're just doing this for our kids, we're just going to pull the money out and figure out the right thing for my own kid, we have a much harder time creating opportunities for all of us to be able to support all kids in one place.
Yeah. Let's just do this. When we have something that we're wondering if we should have or not, let's just have a value proposition conversation. Music to me is one of the most, if you've done music, you likely are in favor. If you haven't, like the majority of students, you're like, why do we need this music program? Let me tell you something. I played trumpet for a long time, and playing trumpet hurts, like physically hurts. I would smash the hell out of my face. It hurt my stomach. It would hurt my face.
Yep.
And
get the headache.
Yeah,
I was a trumpet player.
I had, yeah, right.
Yep.
Like I had like a hernia. Like it was really bad.
Yeah.
And it hurts and you sound terrible.
Yep.
Right. And you go through and you sound terrible. That's the thing. Like you initially think you sound awesome when you're like in 4th or 5th grade. You're
yeah,
like,
exactly.
oh,
like you can actually get it to play one note and you're like,
oh my God, I'm the best. And then as you get better, you're like, oh, this sounds terrible. Yeah. And you have to expose yourself to people. Like I remember I did one band recital. This was actually a solo recital for piano because I play piano as well. And I remember not being prepared. And I remember leaving the recital in tears because I knew I sounded terrible. And the adults that were there to support me were like, you did a great job. I'm like, no, I didn't. Yeah. And you had to face that reality of this hurts. I'm exposed. I see people that are better than me. And man, there's only one way through. Like there's only one thing. You can either quit, but if you're going to keep going, you're going to have to actually work. Yeah. Like this is going to take, I had an arch nemesis. This is the only class I had an arch nemesis in. His name was Dave George. I hated Dave George and he hated me. And he's like, he was in this big family of 5 and they had it together. And like my family was divorced and we're like all, and Dave got like private trumpet lessons and he would practice all through the summer. I didn't practice all in the summer. I didn't practice at all.
Probably got his trumpet clean so it actually looked nice and yours all rusty.
The whole thing. And totally. Right. And I remember the last time he eventually moved out like at the end of freshman year, he moved somewhere else. And I remember going to freshman year, he had been in the marching band all summer long. Like everybody knew him. We were both going into high school. And like, so I didn't know anyone. Come in and it's like, I'm out of shape. Like literally people can't understand it, but it's like you try to play and you're like, that's like, it's like air's leaking out your face because you're trying to play. And so for the first 2 months or first month, when I was like getting back in shape, Dave George was playing like first chair. Right. And I was like, I got this. So I just waited. And then like, it was like a month and a half in, I was like, I'm playing first chair today. He's like, you can't. I'm like, I think I can. And so we get in this argument in class and I forced the band teacher, I forced the argument to the band teacher. He's like, we're going to have chair trouts. I'm like, yeah, we are, Mr. Acatino. We are actually. Right. And so I like forced the issue, got chair trouts. I beat Dave George. It was fantastic. And he like lost his mind. I had an arch nemesis in that class. I didn't have it anywhere else in my life. Yeah. Like band to me brought so much, right?
It's like it taught you that you had to be better. You had to be better than you were.
Yes.
And sometimes that is in comparison to somebody else. And a lot of times it's in comparison to somebody else. But the way you got better was not by making him any worse. You had to go back and practice. You had to go do it yourself. You had to sound horrible for a while. Yes. You probably also maybe learned not to get so out of shape over the summer the next time, right? Which trains you for all kinds of stuff the rest of life. But, and so like when I was in 7th grade, I got to play with the high school band. And I had been good in 7th grade, right? And like when you're
great for 7th graders,
right? And when you're sitting in your house playing by yourself, you are the best of one. Congratulations, you're also the worst of one. But like nobody thinks about that when they're in 7th grade. No. But then you get in there and you're sitting next to somebody who's had 6 years more practice to be able to do something than you, and you see that is a possibility, right? And so whether it was music,
and you don't get exposed like that in math.
That's right.
You don't get exposed like that in physics. You don't get exposed like nobody's putting a 7th grade like writer in with the high school writers, right? Like,
and because we group kids by grade and therefore by age for almost all the academic stuff that they do, it is extracurriculars. It is things like I did. We still called it home ec most of the time when I was there. Then it changed to family and consumer sciences because you got to change the name every once in a while. But there was stuff that I saw kids who were way younger than me and I had to learn how to help them. There were kids way older than me. And then as you get older, you become the more important people. You become the people who are setting the tone for the rest of what's going on. Like National Honor Society, you have programs like that where you have to figure out that you're actually in charge of some stuff. And there's, an advisor, but they're not going to, nothing will happen unless you choose to do this, right? And that type of stuff is different than the academic piece that we see in schools. Do we need to get better at that? Absolutely. I worked for years at an assessment place because I do think that there's something like having an assessment to show the benchmark of whether this is working or not, whether we need to change some things or not. But there's also a whole part of education that is about finding things that make a kid light up. And sometimes that is academic. But most of the time, when you talk to people about what they remember from school that kept them showing up the next day to do the academic stuff is either because of a teacher or somebody else in the school or a thing they got to do that they never could have done at home. They never could have done that at home. They never could have done that unless there was a place dedicated for them to figure out a whole bunch of stuff, find 10 things that they hated and were never going to do again, but the one thing that made them show up for the rest of their school career.
Right.
And that stuff, there isn't a tangible good. It's harder to show like a taxpayer ROI on some of that stuff.
Right.
But all the other things that we want to happen out of schools usually click for somebody in the stuff that a lot of people would say, well, we shouldn't even be paying for that.
Right. I agree. And again, if what we want are relevant, contributing members of society later on, we have to acknowledge that, and especially some that are probably most critical of education, that the things that were most relevant and impactful to them were not just academic based. It's like, okay, so then why are you shocked when people want to engage in things like sports or trumpet?
Yeah.
Right. Like, yeah, like I got a lot out of music. I got a lot out of academics. I got a lot out of sports, a lot. Right. And you marry all of these things. And I would like to think I'm somewhat of a contributor, right?
Yeah.
Like, I don't have a lot of skill sets, but I work really hard. Like, and it's very hard to learn how to merge all that hard work. If I had just done one thing, like, yeah, maybe I would have, but you layer on all of the experiences and my worldview is now like, oh, I'm drawing from all of these different pieces of successes and failures, things I'm proud of, things I'm ashamed of, like all of this made a more relevant, contributing individual. And that's what we need to identify. And that, like, those are the things where it's like, okay, things outside of that, like if you can't tell me how you're not like really learning life lessons and contributing or figuring out ways to contribute in like this area, then we should get rid of that. But we should have an open conversation about what value proposition do each of these activities and relevant things have that are really pragmatic, that it's like, okay, you're going to learn this, or this is what people say. And let's come have like testimony for like band stuff. I don't know. Well, we could go testify for band.
And we also a lot of folks are talking right now about how people are waiting longer and longer to have kids. And then like how one of the things I was thinking about the other day is my half sister was born 7 years later than me. So like I was like old enough to understand that she was a baby and I was not. Like if your kids are super close together, they're like all are kind of going through it together.
Yeah.
But I remember like by the time I was 15, we started doing things at the elementary school, which was, by the way, there's only 2 schools in Council. They're just across the field. By the way, you should go up and go to the Porcupine race on the 4th of July there sometime.
Shut up.
World famous Council, Idaho, 4th of July Porcupine races. You go up, you find a porcupine in the mountains.
You find him?
Yep. You put him in a garbage can, you raise them for a couple of weeks in the dog run, and then you take them down, you run them on the high school football field, and you can win thousands of dollars if you have the fastest, smartest porcupine.
How many people end up in the ER from this?
Well,
like,
it's
a non-zero number.
The more you train, if they like you, the people who do this. But so we'd cross that field to go to the elementary school, and I learned how to like deal with 5-year-olds, which I hadn't had to do for a couple of years, and it was only my sister. But like even when we think about how we want people to be able to parent, there are some things that we can use the system that we've already established. And not that you're going to have like your overall parenting philosophy or any kind of ideology that you want a kid to have, but like just being around people who are different than you, not ideologically, but like literally physically. Right? Age-wise, that happens in a place where we can say, okay, you're going to go over and you need to help this kid read this book. Would you ever read that book on your own? No. Is it a stupid book to you? Absolutely yes. But when you sit down and you see a 5-year-old looking at you like you're the most amazing person in the whole world because somebody from the high school came to their class and now was going to read to them, there were tons of times when you could sit with a kid who wasn't great at reading, who didn't want to do it, and they would sit with the high schoolers and read with them for hours instead of with their teacher. Right. And that teacher still made that interaction happen. And so they needed to be there. But that teacher knew that it wasn't just going to be them doing that work. They needed to bring in other people. And I remember when the high schoolers came over to our class, like that was one of the best days of the year.
Yeah.
And when you got to go see them and you got to go cheer for them and they were the lumberjacks and we were the little tiny lumberjacks and we didn't even know what a lumberjack was, but
you were excited.
And that was the most important thing, was whether we beat Cascade that year, right? Like it was the most important thing that you could do. And that kind of stuff stuck with me. It's one of the reasons I came back here, is because there's still so many places where I think we can get that right in Idaho, and so many places where we do get it right. And it's been sad for me to see. And I think the pandemic had a lot to do with it. People were sick. They were home. They were mad at a lot of different things. School was something that was very right in front of people. And it didn't work for a lot of people during those years too. Right. And what I'm worried about is that we're going to remember that couple of years and make a lot of choices about what the future of education looks like, instead of remember that was a really hard time for a lot of people. And maybe that's not the only time period that we should be learning lessons from. And that there's a lot of kids who are in school right now who have the opportunity to have a lot different schooling than both that and whatever was there before, because we don't need to just do exactly what we were doing before either. Like, what's actually best for those kids right now? What's best for those communities right now? How do we do it in a way that keeps people trusting schools more instead of trusting them less? And there's a lot of reasons for that. But we've got to figure out there's no better way to make people think that a place like Council, Idaho is beautiful than having the Friday night football game and watching that whole place be there. Or the 4th of July Porcupine race where everybody comes out and does something that I've never heard of that happening anywhere else. Right? There's no reason for Council to be a town where it is. There was a mill in the middle of a forest, and that mill closed when I was 10 years old. And it's a really hard place to be there now compared to when there was an actual economic base. People hang on to that place because of the community that's been there, because they have memories of decades of going down and watching the porcupine races, because they were a lumberjack at one point. And those places are held together by schools more often than not. And too many of them are having to go down to a 4-day week. Too many of them are having to ask those people to pay for taxes every single year because something is super expensive and they don't have a tax base to pay for a multi-million-dollar school. And if we can't figure some of that stuff out, I'm really worried about the power of those communities to be able to hold together like they've done for decades, because there has to be some investment in like the idea of this is good, not just the ROI we see at the end.
Jeff, my guy, I've had you here for hours on and off air. Let's do this. I love what you just said. I would love to have you back and keep the conversation going around towns that ostensibly should no longer exist, but exist because of community that's wrapped around school. And how do we support those schools?
Yeah.
Because how far away is Council?
Now with traffic, it's about 3 hours. Although to Monday, they're reopening Highway 95. It's been closed for a while. So you can actually get through Council now. It's about 3 hours from downtown Boise.
3 hours. Man, 4th of July.
Yeah, we'll see what you should come up with me.
Do you think that we could go up like in early June and go check out the porcupine training?
Oh, well,
like, are there people
it's
training?
Porcupine hunting and then hunting to capture. And then you release eventually, right?
Sure.
So yeah, you got to go out. You got to take the flashlight to get them to freeze in the middle of the night. So you go hunting in the middle of the night to get one.
Could we go porcupine hunting?
We
Do you know a
probably
guy?
should.
Do you know a guy?
Oh, yeah.
Oh my God. Yes. Let's do this. Thank you for coming in today. Let's do this again, please God. And we're going to go porcupine hunting.
Sounds good. We'll do it.
Thanks, sir.
Absolutely.